Hello, everyone, and welcome to the With Chinese Characteristics podcast. I'm Natalie.
I'm Cherry.
And together we talk about topics with Chinese characteristics.
So, Natalie.
So, Cherry.
What's our topic today?
So, our topic today is Dr. Fu Manchu.
No.
Unfortunately, yes, Cherry. Because I already did a bunch of work on it, and now we just got to get an episode out of it, okay?
Okay. So give me the lay of the land.
Okay.
Yeah.
So Dr. Fu Manchu, I mean, he is a doctor. He did graduate from evil Chinese medical school.
Okay.
Was a character that was originally based on some short stories by an author named Sax Rohmer in 1910 to about 1917 and 3 novels.
Okay.
Which then became popular and then became movies and everything else. So
Sax Rohmer is
a white guy.
From which country?
From the UK, from the
Okay.
United Kingdom. And we're going to get into where it came from. And you might go, well, why does it matter? Why are we talking about Fu Manchu? And that's a good question.
I already did.
Yes. But, so there's a Marvel movie coming out called Shang-Chi
and the Seven Rings, I believe.
And the character's canonical father is Fu Manchu.
Yeah.
And in the movie, they're changing it to the Mandarin, but it's still basically Fu Manchu, is my understanding. It's just they changed his name. And so I was thinking about, like, okay, Fu Manchu, like, where exactly did it come from?
Yeah.
Because when, especially, now it's better than before. It's still not great, but when there aren't a lot of Asian characters in media, in books and things in the West, then those individual characters have more of an impact.
Yeah, each one matters more.
Each one matters more because, especially also it's like, well, people may never have met a Chinese person.
Yeah.
Right? The only thing they might know of is like these characters from movies and books and things.
Right.
So I wanted to...
Or like Asian kids don't have role models on the big screen.
Yeah, right. Or
they see one and that's the only thing they have.
And it's a white guy with yellow makeup on and a fake mustache.
Yep.
And so I wanted to look at it, and basically I think it's interesting because it shows not only where Fu Manchu comes from, but it's kind of representative of a whole cast of Asian characters from the time period who were written by white people, almost always white men, who were in movies, they're played by white people, and they're designed for a white audience. There's no impact at all by any one Asian in any part of this process. Yeah. And yet that's the cultural heritage.
Well, I guess we're still talking about Fu Manchu today, and I mean
that we're left with.
Yeah.
And so I read a bunch of the novels.
Okay.
I read Sax Rohmer's biography. I read some of his other novels that aren't Fu Manchu, and I have some thoughts.
Okay.
Long story short, the novels are terrible. You shouldn't read them. I don't.
You're giving it away.
Yeah, it has shaken my faith in humanity.
Really, that bad?
That this character has persisted, because
even though you already knew going into it was gonna be kind of like pretty racist.
I knew it was gonna be racist.
Yeah.
But I thought maybe they might be good. Like,
the writing?
Yeah, the writing,
okay.
Right? I'm like, okay, well, maybe it's a product of its time. Or maybe it's been...
Maybe it didn't age well, like one of those.
Yeah, or maybe it's been, like, twisted or something.
Okay.
Like, for example, the original James Bond novels are a lot more complex than the movies make him out to be.
Right.
He's less of, like, a womanizer and all these things, right?
Okay.
He's more of a complex character.
Okay.
And the movies have simplified. So I was like, well, maybe our pop culture has simplified a Fu Manchu. It hasn't.
Okay.
So where did it come from? Where did Fu Manchu come from?
Yeah. Why?
So
where did it come from?
Where did it come from? It all started, like so many stories do on this podcast, with a failed civil service examination. Arthur Henry Ward, son of Irish immigrants to the United Kingdom, had just failed the British civil service examination. A poor study and more interested in fiction than reality, it was unlikely he would have ever passed. However, it was father's hope for him to find steady employment and his own hope that he would find adventure overseas. So,
overseas meaning one of the colonial lands.
Yes. And by adventure, I mean oppressing people.
Yeah.
Right? So...
Just making sure, we're calling it for what is.
This part's a bit tongue-in-cheek.
Yeah.
The next decade of Arthur's life would see him and his eventual wife Elizabeth attempt and fail multiple careers and business ventures.
Okay.
He was a bank clerk, but kept attempting to hypnotize his colleagues.
What?
So Sax Rohmer is like a weirdo. Like his wife, when she first met him, described him as looking like Sherlock Holmes on a cocaine overdose. Like he's just like this weird, frantic man.
Okay.
And he was a bank clerk, and
But try to
and he was like, oh yeah, no, like you can hypnotize people. And he was like, he was just doing stupid stuff, and he got fired.
Okay.
'Cause the bank didn't want to deal with him.
Wow. Couldn't argue with that.
He believed in magic and the occult and the ghosts and all this stuff.
Okay.
He made like weird things like discount skin cream with his wife. He worked at a gas company. He worked as an illustrator.
Okay.
Eventually, he found some small success as a writer for news stories, short stories, and most of all, comedies and musicals.
Okay.
Apparently, he was real good at writing musicals. Living with his father, he and his wife barely kept starvation away some months, and it seemed as if Sax Rohmer, as he used his pen name because he thought it sounded cooler than Arthur Ward, seemed that he would never find success. He would only eat like one meal a day because he would eat dinner with his father, who he lived with his wife, who had a steady job.
Right.
And he would just not have any food the rest of the day. Among his many dalliances was the occult, which he seemed to be a fervent believer. On one night in 1909, he and his wife were clustered around in a Ouija board, which is, I don't know. Look it up. It's a board with a little thing on it, and everybody puts their hands on it, and people act like it's ghosts moving it when clearly it's just you're moving it.
Yes. Maybe we don't tell our listeners to just go look it up.
Okay, maybe don't. But you can buy it from like Hasbro. This is how mystical it is these days.
Yes.
He believed his wife had magical powers, apparently. He thought that her magical powers were stronger than his.
Okay. But he believed he himself had magical powers
No,
too.
he believed that they existed, but he didn't believe that he had them.
Oh, okay.
As far as I know.
But she had them.
She did. She didn't think she had them. But he's like, oh, Elizabeth, you've got mystical powers.
Okay.
So he asked the Ouija board with his wife, how can I best make a living? And the board slowly spelled back, Chinaman.
Oh, my.
Oh, my. So at the time, he didn't know what this meant.
Okay.
Sachs didn't really care about China. He seemed more interested by what we would now call the Middle East, as well as India and Egypt and sort of Tibet. He devoured books on ancient mysticism and Egyptology, but knew almost nothing of China and the Chinese, aside from his visits to the Limehouse Chinatown in London during his reporting days. On one of these visits, though, he supposedly caught a glimpse of a tall and dignified Chinese crime lord named Mr. King, alongside a beautiful Arabic woman as they exited their limousine. He was so struck by this image, he suddenly knew what the Ouija board had been trying to tell him.
Oh.
He had to write a novel about a Chinese crime lord.
Okay.
The first set of stories was serialized in magazines, then printed as a book, The Mystery of Dr. Fu Manchu, in 1913.
Okay.
It was an instant, if modest, success, earning Sax and Elizabeth the unbelievable sum of £50, which they used to travel to Egypt. The arch criminal Dr. Fu Manchu was born.
Okay. That's where it came from?
That's where it came from. This guy that he supposedly saw in Limehouse in London, that he's like, oh, that Chinese guy looks real cool. I'm going to write a book about him. Since then...
He's inspiring to write a book.
Yes, he was inspired to write a book.
He's not going to write a book about him because he doesn't know anything about him.
Well, that didn't stop him. So besides Dr. Fu Manchu, he wrote another book around the same time period called The Yellow Claw, which is about opium and stuff in London.
Okay.
And the villain is named Mr. King, who's a Chinese crime lord. So besides Dr. Fu Manchu, which he's supposedly based on this guy, he wrote an actual book of just fan fiction about this guy.
That he's seen once
and knows nothing about.
Yeah. He has an imagination, I guess.
He has an imagination.
Yeah.
So since then, the character Fu Manchu appeared in over 20 official novels, as well as dozens of movies, radio serials, plays, and TV shows. He is an official character in the Marvel Universe.
Okay.
Or he was, at least, and appeared as a variant in DC Comics. So apparently one of the reasons why Fu Manchu kind of fell out of favor from the Marvel Universe in the 80s was because of copyright reasons, not because they thought it
Not
was racist.
because it was racist?
No, it's because they found it difficult to get some rights for the character
Huh.
and you know.
Interesting. Okay.
So that's
Didn't
why.
know that.
Perhaps one of the most enduring legacies of the character is the quote-unquote Fu Manchu mustache, a long and drooping mustache that dangles down both sides of the character's mouth.
Yeah.
Common in movie and comic versions, it is not present in the novels.
Okay.
In the novels, he's just clean-shaven, basically.
But when it got to the visual part,
Yeah, when
they
they're
decided to make
when they're like, how do we make a white guy look Chinese? Oh, we'll
Yeah.
glue this.
that's what we think Chinese people look like.
Yeah, we'll glue this mysterious-looking mustache on him so he
Yeah.
can stroke it in an oriental manner.
Now he's being sarcastic,
I'm being
by
sarcastic.
the way. Yeah.
So how, though, could a middling writer without much interest or knowledge in China create such an iconic character that stirred the imagination of the English-speaking world? Well,
yeah. How?
mostly because the readers didn't know anything about China either. I made my name on Fu Manchu, he said, Sax Rohmer, because I know nothing about the Chinese. So-
well, isn't that...
So, a lot of this comes from his biography, which was
Okay.
co-written by his wife of like 50 years.
I like how you said 50 years.
Yeah.
You're saying that she did know him.
Yeah, she, they were married for like 50 years.
Yeah.
And she survived him. And this was also written by this later English professor who hung out in the village that Sax Rohmer lived in during World War II, during the Blitz, the Battle of London. And so he seems like he idolizes Sax Rohmer.
Okay.
So I'm going to describe what Sax Rohmer apparently told Kay Van Ash, who's the biographer, about why he made Fu Manchu.
Okay.
So this is going to sound real bad, but I don't think this is like a hit piece. I think this is really what Sax Rohmer thinks. He says, when I began writing, Chinaman was no more than the accepted... So obviously, Chinaman is not a term you would call a Chinese person anymore, right?
Yes. So quote here.
Yes.
Not-
And I would argue, I mean, rather obviously, the reason is not what... One of the large reasons is not what you call a Chinese person is because it's associated with a time of extreme prejudice against Chinese people.
Yes.
So it has negative connotations based on that.
Yes.
Sax Rohmer says, when I began writing, Chinaman was no more than the accepted term for a native of China. The fact that it has such taken on a derogatory meaning is due mostly to the behavior of those Chinamen who lived in such places as Limehouse, which was a Chinatown in London.
In London, yeah.
So he's saying like, well, the reason Chinaman is a bad word now is because they made it a bad word because they're all criminals.
Well, the Chinese people made it a
The
bad
Chinese
word,
people made it a bad
Yeah.
word.
according to him.
Yes. He says, of course, not the whole Chinese population of Limehouse was criminal, but it contained a large number of persons who had left their own country for the most urgent of reasons. These people knew no way of making a living other than by the criminal activities which had made China too hot for them. They brought their crime with them. Naturally, it took our police some time to get their measure. So basically, the only reason why somebody would leave China
Yeah.
is because they're a criminal.
Yeah. Because
that's
it was
what
just
the-
such a nice place back in 19...
Yeah, like 1900, 1910.
Yeah.
I wonder why China was having problems. It certainly could have been places like the UK, destabilizing China.
Yes.
So yeah, he's basically saying the Chinese diaspora are criminals.
Yeah.
That's why they left China.
Even though he said not all of them are,
It's like,
but they are.
Yeah, but they are.
And yeah.
The idea took shape gradually as I realized what was happening in Limehouse was happening likewise in the Chinese communities of foreign cities throughout the world. To the
Okay.
to the Asiatic mind, Cherry. So I'm a quarter Japanese, so I only have a quarter of an Asiatic mind. So you'll have to tell me if this is true.
Okay.
Our conception of humanity in terms of individuals is an absurdity. We were fighting against crime organized, not even into gangs, but into guilds which were international, Cherry. So that's what the Chinese diaspora is. It's a massive international criminal conspiracy.
Wow.
Members of these organizations, these Chinese criminal societies, who for one reason or another had found it convenient to take up residence abroad, simply regrouped themselves to set up local units of the same kind. And this is the significant point. These local units overseas were not independent, but continued to maintain links with the parent society. So what's really nefarious, Cherry, about these Chinese diaspora, they're all criminals. They're all organized into these secret criminal gangs.
Yeah.
And they're all controlled from China. It's not like that they're just writing home. They're all controlled by
They're
China.
not writing to their wives or children or
it's
parents.
their secret mystical masters.
So we have a conspiracy on our hands.
Yes.
On our hands now.
So he's literally saying this is what was happening.
Okay.
The Chinese diaspora is a massive criminal conspiracy.
Right.
He said that much was...
I just want. This is not part of the Fu Manchu book. This is not a fiction.
No, this is what Sax Rohmer actually thinks.
Yeah.
What
of Chinese, like in reality, the Chinese people that he's seeing.
Yes.
The few, probably handful of Chinese people he's seeing in London.
This is what
Chinatown.
he literally thinks.
Yeah. Okay.
He said that much was established fact. Here in Limehouse, it was actually happening.
Okay.
And from that, I fell to dreaming.
Oh,
So he's saying, suppose, I asked myself, a number of these sinister organizations, perhaps even all of them, were in turn responsible to the direction of some super society. Such a society would hold the power to upset governments, perhaps change the very course of civilization. So he's saying, like, all Chinese, the Chinese diaspora are criminals. They're formed into these criminal units that are controlled by master societies in China.
Yeah.
But my fiction is like, what if they're all working to the same purpose? So he says, I began to wonder what the president of my imaginary super society would look like. What matter of man could dominate the worldwide shadowy empire? He would have Caesaresque qualities. He must be a man of great scientific culture, a genius. But to my disappointment, I could get no further. When it came to visualizing the personal appearance of such a being, my imagination refused to function. That's something of himself. He can't think of like a Chinese guy.
A competent Chinese person.
Competent Chinese person.
Yeah.
This was maddening, for now I had become convinced that I was on the right track. Conditions for launching a Chinese villain on the market were ideal. I wondered why it had never before occurred to me. The Boxer Rebellion had started off rumors of a yellow peril, which had not yet died down. So he's like, man, if only I was a better writer, I could better capitalize on these racist feelings against Chinese people, and I could make some money here.
Yeah, and the mention of yellow peril here, right?
Yeah.
That's very revealing. But I mean, just, excuse me if I'm asking the ignorant question.
Yeah.
Back then, yellow peril was indeed the popular conspiracy, right? And then that was it wasn't racist because inherently society was at a different place. That was way more racist.
I mean, it was
today.
racist in a general sense, but to people back then, people would just be like, oh yeah, the Chinese people, there's a lot of them, they stand up, they're gonna take over half the world.
Yeah, the sleepy dragon.
We got to keep them down.
Yeah.
And so
so that was more acceptable back then.
As
the mainstream sort of opinion.
I mean, I think a lot of people. No, I mean, I don't think it was quite as acceptable. It was considered very racist, right?
Okay.
I think arguably, Sax Rohmer made it more accepted by having a character is literally saying, yes, the yellow peril's real, and I'm the leader of the yellow peril, and I'm going to take over the world.
Right.
So he's like, oh man, if only I was a better writer, I could think of a character who I could turn into a racist novel. But then he saw Mr. King in the Chinatown, and he thought, that's it. That's my guy. That's my guy. That's gonna be my money ticket here, my meal ticket.
Yeah. So he started writing.
And now we're stuck with this stupid character 100 years later.
Yeah. Still talking about it.
Well, hopefully.
Still.
I mean, I guess I'm talking about it. So.
Well, it's the Mandarin, the comic books.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So essentially, we have a writer who knows nothing about China or Chinese people, who misunderstands why Chinese people left the nation destabilized by his very own country, and who thinks Chinese live in cramped and poor Chinatowns because they are all criminals on the run. He recognized correctly, though, that there was a potential audience who was also ignorant and frightened of the Chinese diaspora and were well prepared to receive tales that catered to their racist fantasies.
Okay.
So knowing this, let's examine the novels. So what's actually in these novels, right? Are they as bad as you would assume? So I read the first three, which were published in 1913 to 1917, as well as the fourth, published in 1931.
Okay.
I stopped reading there because I just could not read anymore. They're so bad. I cannot imagine somebody who earnestly enjoys these novels.
Well, I think lots of people did.
Yeah, I know, right? I think the movies were way more popular than the novels.
Okay.
I think he made a lot of money on movie rights.
Okay.
But and I think the character became more and more wacky over time, and just sort of became like a supervillain, secret, mystical, super society thing. Because
less about Yellow Peril.
In the 1940s and 50s, like
China was America's ally, and
China's America's allies, and B, like saying in 1950 that there's like a mystical society that's going to make China rule the world when Mao is ruling China is just kind of farcical.
Yeah.
Right.
Right.
It doesn't really work anymore. But the first three are, I think, really the core of it, because those are the three that I think he really tries to make it seem almost like the literary equivalent of like a found footage movie, like the Blair Witch Project.
Okay.
Like, oh, this is a real thing that's really happening, and we just found the tapes.
Right.
So overall, the books follow a plot highly derivative of the Sherlock Holmes series. And also Sherlock Holmes, a lot of people read them and thought they were real. Right?
Yeah.
They thought like, oh wow, this Dr. Watson guy, he's real cool. He's writing down Sherlock Holmes' adventures.
Yeah.
So they're very...
So there's a damaging factor there.
Yeah, no, a lot of people...
pretending that this is real when he knew this was a fiction.
Yes. A lot of people, I'm sure, thought this was real. Apparently, I mean, he claims that the FBI even asked him about the secret society.
Really?
Right?
Who are your sources?
I know, right? So
my God,
it's very damaging, right? Because when there's not that many Asian characters, like, so I mentioned before, I'm quarter Japanese. My grandmother, who married my grandfather after the war, raised my dad and his siblings as like white Americans. She didn't teach them any Japanese. She didn't cook Japanese food. She didn't really teach them anything about Japanese culture, because it's like, well, this is what people thought of Asians. Yeah. And it's like, she's like, oh, I just want people to think you're like white, dark hair, a little tan, right? So they're like, like she thought like, okay, the only way they're not going to be bullied, they're going to be successful, is if people just don't think of them as Japanese.
Yeah, because you can't be Japanese and American at the time. Yeah. Because of the lack of media well, partially. Yes. It was, it's a chicken egg situation.
Yeah, so it hurts. And so obviously Fu Manchu is not a real character, not a real person. Yeah. But it touches on history because it affects history. Yeah. So anyway, so it's basically like Sherlock Holmes, except instead of different villains, it's always the same villain. It's Fu Manchu. Right. Instead of Watson, it's Dr. Petrie, who's a doctor. And instead of Sherlock Holmes, there is a guy named Nayland Smith, who was a police officer in Burma, who has come back, who was Petrie's friend back in the day, and who's returned to London to warn everyone that...
A British police officer in Burma?
Yeah, it was a British colony.
Yeah.
So he was like he was one of the boots on the colonial neck. But he's a hero.
But back then he was a hero.
Yeah, back then he's a hero.
Back then that was just a job for the Brit. Yeah.
Yeah. He's just
they weren't exploiting people.
Law and order around the world, Cherry. Yeah. So he comes back and he's like, Fu Manchu is this crazy thing. You got to go on an adventure with me, Petrie. And Petrie goes on the adventure and he writes in his journal as if
it's all real.
He's Watson and it's all real.
Yeah.
So they've sprinkled in real life things that have happened. Like, for example, at one point they talk about there was an assassination attempt on the governor of Hong Kong, which is apparently true. It did happen around this time. And they're like, oh, actually Fu Manchu did that. So it really is trying to make it seem like it's a real thing, which makes it even more harmful. Yeah. So
he had an agenda.
And the agenda, I think, is to make money. But
to appeal to the racist nature of society at the time.
And as he said, talking to the guy who wrote the autobiography, he's like, yeah, I saw that people were racist and I thought I could make some money here. So it's not like...
It's great.
Yeah, it's great. He specifically tailored this to appeal to the lowest common denominator. Yeah. Basically, for the first three books, which were 1913 to 1917, and then there's a 15-year gap, which we'll talk about. Okay. And then the next book. But the first three books, you have Nayland Smith shows up. He says, Dr. Petrie, we got to go on an adventure. And Dr. Petrie, not a very good doctor. He always has time to go on the adventure. And he even mentions, he's like, well, I don't have a lot of patience, right? Business isn't good. So he's probably
our protagonists aren't really all that impressive.
They're not that impressive.
Okay.
They have to thwart Fu Manchu, usually rescue the same lady each book, and solve these mysteries, and save, the white race and colonialism. So in the world of Fu Manchu, almost all peoples from Cairo to Kyoto are arranged in a scheme to create a new yellow empire, headed by China, and to end
a new yellow empire?
That's what they're going to
call it. That's what it's called?
Yeah, sure.
Oh, well, that's definitely what I would do.
Yeah,
if my people have created a new empire,
yeah,
we would call it a racist.
You would call yourself a racist term?
Yeah. That's what we would call it, the Yellow Empire.
Yeah, I don't know if they're actually, I mean, they call it that. I don't know. Fu Manchu does say we're going to take over the world, but you know, I forget what he calls it. But they describe it as a yellow empire.
Okay.
They're going to end the supremacy of the white race.
Okay.
This is how the characters describe it. They're like, oh, this is the end of the white race.
Wait, we don't want to end the supremacy of the white race?
No, that's what Fu Manchu is going to do.
I mean, I'm for that.
I know, right?
Aren't we for that? I'm sorry, am I reading the room wrong?
We want to.
But this was many years ago.
Yes, yes. The idea of dismantling colonialism and ending European supremacy over the world
was evil at this time.
Yes, is considered evil by by this book. And basically, so it's every book, the first three, Fu Manchu is doing plots, and they say, oh, if Fu Manchu succeeds, it will leave the white race crippled and will be unable to resist it. But the plots are never very ambitious, as you will see. The plots are all very small, so I'm not really sure how this could lead to the end of anything.
Okay.
Maybe
because you didn't finish the book.
Let me describe how Fu Manchu is described to Petrie, the doctor, by Nayland Smith. He says, this man, whether a fanatic or duly appointed agent, is unquestionably the most malign and formidable personality existing in the known world today. He is a linguist who speaks with almost equal facility in any of the civilized languages and in most of the barbaric.
Most of the barbaric?
Not all of the barbaric, Cherry. Let's not.
My God.
Nobody could do that.
Okay.
The
barbaric.
Also, I'd be interested to think which languages he
are barbaric. Yeah, that's what I'm saying.
I'm guessing it's not English.
Clearly.
Yeah. He is an adept in all the arts and sciences which a great university could teach him. He is also an adept in certain obscure arts and sciences which no university of today can teach. He has the brains of any three men of genius. Petrie, he is a mental giant.
Wait, all good so far?
All good so far. And let me tell you what his mission is. And he says, as to his mission among men, why did Mr. Jules fall during a Paris opera house? Because of heart failure? No, because his last speech had shown that he held the key to the secret of Tonkin, which is northern Vietnam. So it's like, Fu Manchu.
One man held the secret key of
So Fu Manchu assassinated this French guy who was going to finish colonizing Vietnam.
Because that's how it works.
That's how it works. And then he talks about
the
this
French
Russian
government, just forget about it.
They're done. They're over. I mean, if that was true, when Francis Garnier got shot by, stabbed by Louis Ongfu, they would have just given up. But,
I know, yeah.
So then they talk about this Russian guy who was killed because he was trying to colonize Mongolia.
Okay.
And then this British guy who was killed because he understood the importance of the Tibetan frontiers. I say to you solemnly, Petrie, that these are but a few. Is there a man who would arouse the West to a sense of the awakening of the East, who would teach the deaf to hear, the blind to see, that the millions only await their leader? And this is only one phase of the devilish campaign. The others I can merely surmise. So he's saying like, the China's ready to awaken, right? And that's
evil. That's what we consider as evil.
That is evil, right? Yeah. And if you're trying to kill people who are trying to, and it's not
kill
just China, right? He's like, it's all these colonial places.
Yeah, Vietnam sounds like. Yeah.
He says, imagine a person tall, lean, and feline, high-shouldered, with a brow like Shakespeare and a face like Satan, a close-shaven skull, and long magnetic eyes of the true cat green. So
God.
So he looks like a cat. He has literal cat eyes.
Well, he has the face of a Satan.
Face of a Satan.
I don't even know what that looks like, but... okay, so now it gets, I'm honestly speaking, the first two sentences wasn't that all that much troublesome until you get to describing
the funny
how he
part
looked.
is like, none of this really sounds like a human being, let alone a Chinese person. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Right? He's saying he probably, like you said, haven't seen that many Chinese people. He's like, there's probably some Chinese people out there with glowing cat eyes.
Yeah.
He also, at some point, he describes that Fu Manchu has like a second eyelid that goes over his eyes like a lizard, like film.
Oh.
So anyway, invest in him with all the cruel cunning of an entire Eastern race accumulated in one giant intellect, with all the resources of science past and present, with all the resources, if you will, of a wealthy government, which, however, has already denied all knowledge of existence. Imagine that awful being, and you will have a mental picture of Dr. Fu Manchu, the yellow peril incarnate in one man. So he's saying...
Well, that's not biased at all.
No. So he's saying like...
That's totally...
So he's saying like, oh yeah, China's backing him, right? This is he's not just a villain.
Yeah.
He is backed and financed by China.
Yeah.
To prepare the colonial world to fall.
Yes.
So that's in the Marvel universe right there.
Yeah.
So, yeah. So, this is all done.
Is this difficult for you yet?
Well, it's just so... this is all done completely without irony.
Yeah. Which is ironic.
Which is ironic in its own way.
Yeah.
Because, like, many today would consider the emancipation of India or China or Vietnam from a colonial yoke to be a noble, heroic enterprise. Regardless,
I would like to think most today.
Yeah, almost all, right?
Yeah.
I'm sure there's some closet...
There's some crazy ones out there, yeah.
Crazy people out there. Regardless of the methods used, right?
Yeah.
You know, you can't dismantle a colonial empire without breaking a few eggs. But no justification is ever really given for the worldview in the books that this dismantling of a colonial empire or the rise of China or a more assertive China or places like Tibet or India or Vietnam not being directly under European
British
control.
rule, yeah.
It's never justified for why it's better that they're under these foreign control. It's just assumed that the reader is going to agree with that.
Oh, yeah. The targeted audiences of
yes.
these books are, you know, they already have sort of a preset of opinions,
yes.
a set of opinions that are like, of course, colonialism is good.
So strangely, even though like they're describing him as like this demonic cat man, like Fu Manchu's motives as he puts them out seem fairly reasonable
from our eyes.
Yeah. And it's like, well, yeah, you know, like he's assassinating a couple people, but like...
But you were supposed to think that he was evil because he didn't like colonialism.
Yeah, but it's like when in reality, you know, in places like India, I mean, you know, people are dying every day because of the result of colonial oppression, right?
Yeah, I don't think we need to prove that colonialism was bad. I think that's already so...
No, but it's just sort of, it's so well, especially when we talk about, we're going to get to Fu Manchu's villainy, his supposed villainy, but it's like the scale of what is going on in a place like China with like the opium trade and like, and the weapons trade, and like what Fu Manchu is doing is so astronomically different. It's like a joke. And so it's hard to believe that there's not some irony here. But there's not. This is just how Sax Rohmer...
No irony intended.
No irony intended.
At least, yeah.
Yeah, there's a lot of irony to be found here. So the books play out rather formulaically. Normally there's a couple inciting incidents, murders, thefts, as Fu Manchu advances his goals.
Okay.
They think they have him cornered, though Fu Manchu has this woman who works for him named Karamena, who falls in love with Petrie, the doctor.
Of course.
Yeah, because he's a handsome English man.
Yeah.
And I'm not going to get into her because that's too much. We could do a whole podcast and it's not worth. It's a fictional character. So
okay. Well, I thought they were supposed to be real.
I know.
Yeah. So go on, please.
So she always goes, no, it's a trap. And they're like, oh no, it's not a trap. We're real smart. And then it's a trap. And then they get captured. She helps rescue them. This happens a couple times each book.
Okay.
And then eventually they kill Fu Manchu, quote unquote, kill him. And then, and then he's back the next book.
Ah, so he's like Jon Snow. So a magical world.
Yes, it's a magical world.
Yeah.
Just as so, I'm going to talk about some of Fu Manchu's supposed plots.
Okay.
Yeah.
Sounds good.
Okay. So one thing that I think you'll quickly get if you read these, which you shouldn't, is that Sax Rohmer is not a very good writer.
Oh. Okay.
And the only entertainment in these books is in like the same entertainment of like watching like a poorly done movie, like a bad like B movie, where you're like, okay, this is just so incompetent that it's like kind of amusing. But Sax Rohmer really thought he was a good writer, and I think the 15-year gap between the first 3 novels and the rest of them is because he wrote a bunch of other books, and none of them were popular, and he probably needed some money again. So he came crawling back to Fu Manchu.
To racism.
Yeah, to racism.
Yeah.
Because nothing else he did was ever successful.
Well, whatever sells at
yes.
that time and
but basically saying I'm saying he's a hack.
Yeah.
There is some corny enjoyment in these novels because of how bad they are, but that's tempered by the fact that they were playing into a racist stereotype that caused real harm to people.
Yeah.
Not just the Chinese diaspora, but also Western views on China itself.
Yeah.
When it's like getting attacked by Japan, right? And things like that, right? It lowered Western sympathy for Asia in general because of it.
Yeah.
So these are some of the, so Fu Manchu, he kills a lot of people. His first thing he does is he wants to kill this guy. So he gets a special bug that is poisonous. I think it's like a centipede or something. He's killed a bunch of people like this. There's all these people and they're dying. They can't figure out why. And Nayland Smith's like, I think it's Fu Manchu. And basically Fu Manchu has his pretty lady hand somebody a business card. Okay. It has a perfume on it. And it's the perfume is the same type of flower that the bug likes to eat.
Okay.
And then so they'll have the perfume on their hand. And then somebody sneaks up to the person's window in the middle of the night and pushes the bug through. I think they tie the bug to a string. And then they wait for the bug to crawl over and bite the person. And then they pull the bug back.
This is the middle of the night?
This is the middle of the night.
What if they have washed their hands?
That's a very good question, Jerry. I didn't even think about that.
No, well, I mean, you get handed a business card during the day usually, right?
Yeah, because it's hours later that these events happen.
Yeah.
So yeah, I don't know what you do if you wash your hands, right? What if you're wearing gloves and you take the business card, right? Like, yeah. So anyway, I guess you just keep trying. You just keep giving the business cards.
And hoping that these are people who aren't very good on personal hygienes.
Yes.
Who never wash their hands.
So they discover that.
Okay.
And, Fu Manchu foiled again. They're killing people at night by hiding in trees and dropping pitch black cats on their heads.
Oh, black cats don't get enough credit. They get all the bad,
I know. They're always being put up to crime.
I know.
And he puts poison on their claws.
Okay.
So if they get scratched, somebody gets scratched, they die.
And the cat goes and scratches the target?
Well, they drop it on the person's head. So then theoretically it scratches on the way down.
Oh, okay.
So you got to time it.
Okay.
They discover that scheme because Fu Manchu's agents are out catching the cats the next morning. And
they got to get the cat back.
They got to get the cats back. Apparently.
It's not just a one-off.
No.
They don't just have a bunch of black cats ready to go.
They've only got a couple. They've only got a couple cats, Jerry.
Okay.
And again, this is the guy, Jerry. This is the guy. Okay, I'm like
reading to the microphone.
Getting too excited.
You're getting too excited.
His biography is titled "Master of Villainy," as if Sax Rohmer is really this master intellect. Okay, so like Sherlock Holmes. In order to write Sherlock Holmes, Arthur Conan Doyle had to be able to craft mysteries,
right,
that seem like, oh, you would have to be real smart to solve this mystery, right? You have to construct it in a way that gives the reader hints so they can tell there's something going on, right? Then there's a payoff and there's a mystery, right? But like Sax Rohmer's not very smart, and he's doesn't know anything about China, and he's a hack. So all of Fu Manchu's schemes, so everybody just says, oh, man, that Fu Manchu, he is the most evil, smart person.
Yeah.
He's the most criminal mastermind. And it's like, oh, what does this criminal mastermind do? What is his grand...
So the evidence doesn't support that claim.
The evidence doesn't support the claim. Okay. What's his grand scheme to take over the world? It's like, oh, we'll take black cats with poison in their cults. We'll drop them on people from trees. He does a lot of stuff with weed, which is treated as like a super drug. Cherry, in the world of Fu Manchu, if you give somebody cannabis, if you give somebody weed, you can get them to do whatever you want. They're gonna be.
Is that how it works?
That's how it works, Cherry. So like one guy, he has some weapon, like blueprints. It's called an aerial torpedo, and I guess it's like a missile. And Fu Manchu wants the plans.
Okay. And
so he replaces the guy. They could just go in there and, I don't know, break the safe open or just threaten the guy. But they replace his sleeping pills with weed. And he takes the weed and he gets real high. And then Fu Manchu goes in and is like, hey, you got to open up the safe. And the guy opens it. But then he just calls the police while Fu Manchu's there. And they just let him.
Well, clearly not high enough.
Yeah. But they get the plans. And Fu Manchu says to them, he says mysteriously from somewhere behind them, another win for China. So he's
gotta remind the readers who are the villains. Fu Manchu.
Yeah.
And China.
There's a ghost house which he's using as a base. Which is so spooky, Cherry. 2 people have died there of heart attacks.
Of heart attacks? They were just so shocked.
It's so spooky.
Okay.
So they go there, the protagonists, and they find that there's 3 things that Fu Manchu is doing that has caused these people to die because he's so diabolical.
Okay.
So terrifying. 1, he's sitting in the basement with a light switch, and he's flicking the light switch so the lights flash. Okay?
Okay.
So, second is he has tied bells to rats, and he let them loose in the walls. So the walls are making weird, spooky noises.
Okay.
And 3, he has people do spooky stuff with flashlights, like quickly. Like he'll put a hand out and he'll hold a flashlight behind it so you can see the bones. I mean, this is 1913. Maybe that was like real science fiction stuff.
Don't you also like see the person?
No, I think it was like from behind a wall or something. They would stick an arm out with a flashlight and you could see hands with bones.
Okay.
And that was so scary it killed people. But they foiled that plot.
Okay.
He likes to just send people packages and they open it and there's poison in it. There's poison gas.
Okay. Airtight packages.
Yes.
Back then.
I know. He's very sophisticated.
Yeah.
Fu Manchu. He opens an artsy weed house where he gets the elite of the UK high and national secrets.
Well, that is, to be fair, that is the thing that I think spies do. Like, get...
But that's a fairly normal thing. That it doesn't require a criminal mastermind.
It doesn't,
to have a house where
like
people,
get blended into high society and like
listen to music.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, just lots of very schoolyard plots.
Okay.
Right. He has people
Seems
killed
kind of cliche.
mysteriously in hotels.
Okay.
He has people climb up the windows and knock on the window, and somebody opens it and looks out, and they like push them out of the window, so they fall.
Okay.
Yeah.
Don't people just look up and like there's another person there?
No. Okay. It's so okay. I just think it's because he's a bad writer.
Okay.
So it's like, okay, so they know Fu Manchu is doing this. They know somehow Fu Manchu is getting people to get thrown out of windows.
Okay, but
So
they
they
just
go-
can't.
So they go stay in a hotel,
Okay.
and they go in the middle of the night. They hear the rapping on the window, and that the guy opens the window. The main character sticks his head out of the window, and then they grab him with the rope and they're pulling him out. But then
Right.
you have the rest of the group pull him back in,
Right.
and it's like,
Why did you
why
stick
did
your
you
head
do
out the
that,
window?
right? Just because he couldn't think of how else to make the scene exciting.
Okay.
He's like, well, I have to make them fall for the trap.
So
because-
instead, he seems to be making the main character the protagonist.
No, they seem really
It's
stupid.
kind of stupid, yeah.
There's a scene in the second. So they always find Fu Manchu's secret base. They find him. They see Fu Manchu, and he pushes a button, and they fall down a trapdoor.
Okay.
This happens so often that one of the characters, this is like the 3rd or 4th time it happens, he even reflects upon it. I realized that the curtains had masked a collapsible trap, a sheer pit of blackness, an instant before I was precipitated into it, but the knowledge came too late. I fell, dropping lamp and pistol and clutching at the fallen hangings, but they offered me no support. My head seemed to be bursting. I could only utter a hoarse groan as I fell. When my mind began to work again and returning consciousness, I found it to be laden with reproach. How often in the past have we blindly hurled ourselves into just such a simple trap as this? Should we never learn that where Fu Manchu was, impetuosity must prove fatal? On 2 distinct occasions in the past, we had been made the victims of this device, yet even though we had practical conclusive evidence that the studio was used by Fu Manchu, we had failed to sound every foot of it before trusting on its weight for support. And then Fu Manchu is mocking them as they're falling down the pit. He says, there is such a divine simplicity in the English mind that one may lay one's plans with mathematical precision and rely upon Nayland Smith and Dr. Petrie to play their allotted parts. So basically, like...
At least the characters are self-aware how stupid they are.
Yeah. And I really just think it's like, Fu Manchu, it's like, okay, Sax Rohmer's like, okay, well, I gotta pad out this book a little bit longer, so I can't have them capture Fu Manchu here. They have to get caught. And so it's either like, they open the door, they step inside, and they immediately fall down a hole, which happens a bunch of times.
And they never learn.
They literally never learn.
Okay.
They literally never are like, let's wait. Or they'll do something stupid like they'll drop their guns in the river by accident. They'll just walk into a room without looking and somebody will hit them on the back of the head. they'll drink something given it.
Okay.
They'll hear a noise, they'll walk outside and somebody put a bag over their head. Like,
don't seem to be very good detectives.
No, the only reason it works
Yeah.
is because he just writes them as really stupid, because I just think he can't think of anything more clever.
Okay.
So he just has to make them stupid so they fall for these things.
Right.
And again, you might think like, oh, it's ironic. Like, it's like no, I think
it's not a comical, it's not a funny
No,
book.
it's played as like, if somehow Fu Manchu succeeds, that he's going to take over the world. And it's like, yeah, really, he's going to take over the world by like having trapdoors and like dropping cats on people. But
fighting second grade detectives.
Yeah, second grade detectives,
not that great at
right?
their jobs.
And even then, it's like we said, like, is that even a bad goal that Fu Manchu's doing, right? So yeah, so they kill him, they blow him up, they shoot him in the head, there's shipwrecks, but he always comes back. There's some lighter moments. In the third book, Fu Manchu captures Dr. Petrie and another doctor to make them do brain surgery on him because they shot him in the second book. So in the third book, he's got a bullet in his head, so he needs them to do brain surgery on him. So there's some continuity there.
Okay.
Also in this one, I think it's the second or third book, a high up, even more high up secret Chinese society world domination person visits London and gifts
higher than Fu Manchu.
Higher than Fu Manchu.
Wow.
So really, Nayland Smith makes a big deal about how Fu Manchu is the master of this movement, but really,
he's not.
So the high up person gifts Fu Manchu a white peacock, but then Fu Manchu loses it. And Fu Manchu is in so much trouble that he's going to have to like commit suicide or something. They cut a deal with him and they find his peacock for him, and then he gives them, I forget what happens, but it's stupid. So again, this is all played very seriously. And if it's really meant to be ironic, then the books, the biography, it's like the biggest long con in the history of the world. If this is actually like meant to be like campy. I think the later novels are, when he just leaned into it, when he's like, yeah, whatever, as long as I need
keep
money.
churning out books.
Keep churning out books. But I really think these ones, he really thought like, oh yeah, this is really going to scare people. And it's not just Chinese people who Sax Rohmer doesn't like.
Surprise, surprise.
Yeah, and Fu Manchu, it's often described as, Fu Manchu is so evil that only the Chinese people could create such an evil character. No other race is as evil enough, Cherry, to create Fu Manchu.
Okay.
Is devious enough. So he doesn't like anybody who doesn't white or the right type of white. So there are several Jews who betray him for money, Chinese dudes in fake makeup who are actually Chinese, but they're pretending to be Americans. There's Greek, whose hospitality is a
Greek people weren't okay either.
No, Cherry, they're a little too close.
A bit too tan?
A little bit too tan.
Yeah.
I guess,
not pale enough.
I guess they can be an agent of Fu Manchu. I don't think there's any British person who is ever an agent of Fu Manchu. But,
because they're upstanding white citizens of the world.
They would never do that. It's really like only white British people are like pure. Yeah, the fourth book, after the 15-year gap, takes place in Egypt with a new narrator, and it still has the rest of the cast, and it's real boring. It's all about pyramids and stuff. Sax Rohmer loves Egypt. He loves pyramids. Some of the only people who aren't British who get some decent representation, or they're not treated as entirely like evil, are Egyptians and like kind of Arabic people, because he loves that stuff. I think he wishes he was writing a book about Egypt, and he's written a bunch of books about Egypt.
Or were they not as successful?
I don't think they were. Otherwise,
well, that's too bad. I'd rather he got famous for those rather than Fu Manchu.
He's just not a good writer, Cherry. So there's other things that get added through the books. We learn that Fu Manchu is part of a greater super secret society in the second book.
Okay.
The third book, we learn that Lamaism in Tibet is really just a front. All the reincarnations are just a way to accumulate all the wisdom of the East into like a super Chinese empress. And spoiler, she's hot, because of course she's gonna be, because Sax Rohmer likes writing about how hot all these ladies are.
Well, he really doesn't know much about China, if that's what
I know.
Or Chinese politics per se, if that's what he thinks.
Well,
not the hot lady part, the
Lamaism.
Tibet and Lamaism.
He doesn't understand. I mean, he also doesn't, I think, fully understand that like Vietnam or like Mongolia are different places with different cultures. He just assumes that like, I don't know. I mean, he would actually, I feel like maybe like modern Chinese territorial ambitions would like Sax Rohmer because he kind of just assumes everything over there is China, I think. And so the books are really stuck in this like weird 1800s view of China.
Even though it was written
in the
after
from,
that.
Yeah, from like 1913 when the new China to,
which
1950s.
The world was a much more modern place already.
Yeah.
But
so in his fourth book, which is set in the 1930s, there's still like Chinese officials with like court dress on. And like, like feathers in their cap and like cues and stuff.
Right. So you're talking about they're dressed like government officials in the Qing Empire.
Yes.
Which has ended, 20 years ago, like already at this point?
20 years ago at that point. And one of the things that the book kind of talks about, or the books kind of imply, is that all this new China stuff is just fake.
Oh.
And in reality, there's still an emperor, there's still all this secret shenanigans, and in reality, the real China's still out there.
The Qing Empire.
The Qing.
Still,
well, I mean, I don't think
to him that's the real.
He doesn't
China.
really even. I really don't think he understands the difference between like Han Chinese, the Qing Empire, Manchu,
right?
The different dynasties. He's just like, and if he does,
it's all Chinese. It's all
China to him. Even if he does, he doesn't write about it.
Okay. But it's just they're all evil. That's what's important.
No, yeah, I mean, really, he went to Chinatown. He hung out around Chinatown. He's like, yeah, I could make a villain off of this.
Yeah.
He used some descriptions about what he thought Chinatown looked like, because the books basically take place in London for a description, and then he just made up a bunch of weird bugs and things, and like that's it. Like that's the character. There's no knowledge or any history about it. So anyway, so just as an example, so this is from the biography. So after the success of Fu Manchu, he makes a fake, or one of the books, he makes a fake perfume company. That he pretends is like a famous Chinese perfume company. Okay. And he goes through this scheme where he like makes woven bamboo bottles that he gets the Chinese people in Chinatown to make for him. Okay. And he puts silk tassels on them, and he gets Chinese people from Chinatown in London to dress up like in like what he thought Chinese people looked like to sell it. So they had queues, they had robes, they had all that stuff. And he claims in the biography, well, I knew Chinese people didn't dress like that anymore. This is like in the 1920s. But he's like, but this is what people would expect to see. He's like, he
like
claims
him?
to have known better.
Right.
Just like he claims to know that the name Fu Manchu doesn't make sense. But he's like, well, this is what the people wanted. And then the people stopped coming back to sell it. Right. And they wouldn't wear fake cues anymore because they didn't have cues anymore. As we talked about in our first episode. Yes. Cues were a thing that the Qing court and the Manchurians basically made everyone wear. Yeah, every man wear to represent like that they're subjects of the Qing Empire. Yeah. And Sax Rohmer, in his biography, wrote like, oh, well, it turns out the people I hired were low caste, and the rest of Chinatown got mad at them because they were wearing cues that they weren't entitled to wear. Which is like,
yeah, so he doesn't know anything about Chinese culture or Chinese politics.
And this was probably, he told the guy writing the biography in the 1930s or 40s. So he never even was curious enough to look it up after the fact.
All that time, yeah.
Yeah. So, yeah, and
there's no caste, just to right. Like,
there's no caste. Everybody. I
mean, there is a social, like hierarchy. But, the queue is something that everyone's got to wear to show their loyalty to the Qing Empire. And in 1912, where even before that, people started cutting off their queue because, the old empire was dying. And
so really, it's probably that China. Other people in the Chinatown who are probably like, why are you wearing, why are you making a mockery of this, right? Yeah. So, he doesn't understand China. He doesn't understand lots of people. He's just kind of fundamentally incurious about China. So I want to talk about
kind of like a trait of a common racist.
Yeah, racist, right?
Yeah.
So his obituary in I forget what year he died, like 1950 something. His obituary says, after living with Fu Manchu for more than 40 years, Mr. Romer declared that he was heartily sick of him. But somewhat to Mr. Romer's regret, his public never thought of his writings in terms of much else but Fu Manchu.
Oh, that's our regret too.
Yes.
That's the public's regret as well. Yeah.
And even in as early as 1961, this is a review of the books from the New York Times.
Right.
The tales of Fu Manchu are outrageous, absurd, badly written, and dated. They might even be denounced if one could take them seriously as racist propaganda. So I guess a kind of end question is like, well, what to make of Fu Manchu, right? Like
today, what do we think of
today?
Where do we go today?
So I want to read something he says in the 4th book.
Okay.
As the justification for all his villainy.
Okay.
I say villainy in quotes. Where he says, I worked for my country. I saw China misruled, falling into decay, with all her vast resources becoming prey for carrion. I hope to give China that place in the world to which her intellect, her industry, and her ideals entitle her. I hope to awaken China. My methods, Sir Dennis, were bad. My motives were good. So, and that was from the 4th book, which was written 15 years later. So I kind of wonder if Sax Rohmer was like kind of trying to backpedal a little bit. Both Japanese American and Chinese American associations denounced the book. He wasn't allowed to publish anything in the U.S. or I think the U.K. either during World War II. All the movies got paused because China was an ally. Yeah. So the U.S. government thought this was damaging enough that we don't even want it out there during the war because we need them. The like Chinese consulate in the 30s, the Chinese embassy denounced it and tried to get the books stopped in general. Right. So obviously, even back then, right, even in like the by the time of like the 20s and 30s,
it was already not okay with a lot of people.
Yeah, people are like, these is like real racist, and I think what happened is that Sax Rohmer, I think, just made the character goofier because he thought like, well, this is my meal ticket. Right. I gotta make this less like a found footage true crime story, and more like this wacky supervillain, to kind of take some of the heat off. So nobody could accuse me. That I could just be like, well, it's this fantastical character, right? But I could only think of that's the only reason it's survived this long is because of this kind of later attempt to make it like a wacky character. But the origin, I mean, it's like, it makes me think of if in like Germany in the 1930s, some Nazi made like a book series about a really villainous Jewish guy, Dr. Goldstein or something, and he's the product of this plot to have Judaism take over the world and form a new empire. And
and that book still exists
and that book
today.
Still exists, right? And that character's in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, and it's like, well, it's fun, like. Yeah. And so it's kind of shocking to me. Like, for example, like he was in a movie. He played a small part in a movie played by Nicolas Cage of all people, as late as 2008. Yeah. And it's just like, it's in video games. Like, there'll be like the Fu Manchu mustache. Well, a lot of times it'd be like a customization option. And it's not just an insensitive portrayal. It's a guy who literally designed the character to be as racist and to stoke the fears of readers as much as possible. Like,
but maybe that's why because obviously he was sort of an opportunist, right?
He was 100% an opportunist.
And he wrote it to, like, he didn't just create this idea or this demon, right? This fantastical demonized character on his own. Society created it with him. The pop culture at the time, or public opinion, I don't know, created it with him, right? He had a targeted audience in mind, and the readers were ready to read something like that and buy into the fear, the demonization, of a Chinese character. So, and one thing that bothered me was that if you look up like Fu Manchu movies,
Yeah.
the movies was him as the main character, not just like, the Mandarin in I don't know the Iron Man,
Yeah.
But like the actual movies was him as the main character. Hollywood made, this was many years ago, but still there was a huge list of them.
Yeah.
And that anything on the big screen, like you said, when there's not that many media representation, each one of them, matters and leaves a heavy impression.
Well, we're going to talk about, I think we're going to do a companion episode where we talk about the Fu Manchu movies. We talk about white people playing Asian characters.
Okay.
Which is, for whatever reason,
yeah.
It just seems like people have not had as much of an, like it never became quite as socially unacceptable as like white characters playing like in blackface, right? Like,
yeah. So they were playing in yellowface, you're saying?
Yeah, yellowface.
Yeah.
Like, I'm just like, there's TV series like Kung Fu, right? Which they're remaking now, but it's like,
oh, the original was a white
so
person
white
creating
guy.
But like the white guy playing a Chinese person?
Yeah, he's supposed to be a Chinese guy.
Oh,
it's called the Chinaman, and he wanders the Old West and does Kung Fu with people.
Just like what the Ouija board told Sax Roman.
It's a guy named David Carradine, right? And apparently the main character was supposed to be Bruce Lee, but for whatever reason they wanted a white guy to play him. They didn't think
over Bruce Lee.
Oh, so
God.
So like, yeah. Anyway, that's this whole thing. We're gonna talk about that next week. I think. And
they had no taste.
And the Fu Manchu movies.
Yeah.
But yeah. I mean, it's.
Well, if I may say this, thank you for reading the book. So we don't have to.
Don't
including me.
Yeah, don't read the books. They're bad, right?
And this might be one of the few. I think the first one that like book or / movie review we've done. Yeah. That we're gonna say don't read it. We don't recommend it.
Yeah, I mean,
it's troublesome
you can read
still.
It if you want, but the first 3 books are in public domain now. They're just on like Project Gutenberg. You can just you could read them if you wanted.
Gosh, it's been a long time. Yeah.
I got a used copy one because I just wanted to make notes on it. There's I have 50 Post-its sticking out of things that are
too troublesome.
Too troublesome, but
the whole book was troublesome.
Yeah, but just to put a pin on it, right?
Yeah.
So this is a copy of the first novel, and it was re-released. It was printed in 2012, and presumably
in America.
In America, and presumably you could just buy this at a bookstore.
Yeah, it looks like a regular modern book to me. Yeah.
Titan
sitting
Books,
across from you.
Anyway, so but if you look at the description, right? Yeah. It says London, 1913, the era of Sherlock Holmes, Dracula, and the Invisible Man, a time of shadows, secret societies, and dens filled with opium addicts. Into this world comes the most fantastic emissary of evil society has ever known. And you read that and you think this is like a, adventure, thing. And it's like, but in reality it's racist propaganda.
Yeah.
Right. And I can't think of another series like that that
still remains.
That still remains that you would just you wouldn't,
and still has its legacy in pop culture.
Yeah, and that you wouldn't even because if you see old like Looney Tunes or Warner Brothers cartoons, a lot of times they'll put a disclaimer in front and they'll say these were a product of their time. We've decided not to edit them for modern audience because we feel like we just have to show what it was like back then, but they're going to be questionable.
But that's not how this is treated. This is just this is treated like fiction.
It's a fun adventure story, right?
Yeah.
It's saying like Sherlock Holmes, Dracula, the Invisible Man, and it's like, okay, Dracula and the Invisible Man, like mystical creatures.
Yeah. Right?
With supernatural powers. Whereas this is talking about how Fu Manchu is an agent of the Chinese government. We're acting like he's a real person. Yeah. And that this is what China wants to do. And everyone around you, Cherry, every Chinese person you know.
Yeah.
They
is in on this.
They're in on it, Cherry.
Yeah. Well, including me, I guess, by that definition.
They're all in on it, right?
Yeah.
You can't trust any of them.
No.
And so anyway, so don't read Fu Manchu. If anybody tells
we
you
don't need to
I'm
slam it that
slamming,
hard.
I'm annoyed. I spend so much time reading all these stupid
Yeah,
books.
you did spend a lot of time.
Because I was thinking like maybe there's something I'm missing, like maybe, but no, I'm not. They're terrible.
You gave it time.
Not only is it racist, he's a terrible author.
Yeah.
They're bad.
And this is your conclusion after
Like,
you have given it time. You have
I've
read
given
all
it
the
time.
books. Well, not all the books. You've read
I've
some
read the
thick
origin
books
of
over
it.
there. Yeah.
And I just think you can't. I just think because I was thinking like, well, maybe you could do a deconstruction of Fu Manchu.
Do you think? But you don't think they can salvage it?
Yeah, as a hero.
Okay.
Right, because he's fighting colonial powers.
Yeah.
So you could go like, oh well, these books are biased because they're written from the perspective of a British colonialist.
Right.
But from Fu Manchu's perspective, he's trying to break colonial power and liberate all these people.
From my perspective today, he's
Yes. But it's just I don't know.
Too much baggage.
Yeah. So that's my takeaway is it's just I mean Sax Rohmer's a bad author is I think my main takeaway. But also Fu Manchu is.
But he alone didn't make Fu Manchu, I would argue.
No, it's
so media representation.
And also society was prepared to accept that idea of villainy from a Chinese character.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, and it's has been something that has been set back the representation and public view on Asians, not just Chinese people, for the past 100 years. Fortunately, its heyday is gone.
Yes.
But
we're working on moving forward.
Yeah, but if you're making a video game, don't make a Fu Manchu mustache. just let it die.
Just let it die.
He sucks.
It's okay to not touch it.
Yeah, he sucks. He's a bad character.
Yeah.
It's bad books.
Yeah.
Well, anyway, hopefully that was useful to someone. Now you know.
Talking to the microphone.
Oh, I'm too agitated. So anyway, hopefully that was interesting to someone. Thank you for listening. We're going to talk about Fu Manchu movies and representation next week. So this is Natalie after the fact, and after both doing this episode and editing it, I'm just annoyed all over again that this character made by such a hack author that was specifically designed to be as racist as possible still exists in any way in the public consciousness. And I'm not going to do another episode on Fu Manchu, so we're not going to talk about the movies. Maybe we'll do another episode on white actors playing Chinese characters eventually, but I don't want to talk about it anymore. So goodbye, Fu Manchu.
If you enjoyed today's episode,
oh my god,
okay, can you stop it?
Okay, fine.
If you enjoyed today's episode where Natalie read a book, many books actually in this case, so that you don't have to and I don't have to, recommend our podcast to one of your friends. Or write us a review on Apple Podcast or whatever podcast platform you get this, if they allow reviews. And thank you for staying with us throughout season 2. Well, we'll still have a few more episodes to go, but see you next time.
Bye.
Bye.